Welcome to our webinar. I'm Mathilde, I'm project manager at ProVeg, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar, focusing on the potential of hybrid foods, blending plant-based and cultivated animal ingredients. And by cultivated, I refer to animal ingredients or products that are produced directly by cell cultivation, rather than breeding, raising, and slaughtering animals. So cultivated meat, for instance, it's real meat cultivated directly from animal cells, and it's really all about changing the process rather than the food, which has the potential to vastly reduce the negative impacts of conventional animal meat production. And in recent years, we really have seen the plant-based sector booming, with products increasingly mimicking the taste, the texture, and functionality of their animal counterparts. And at the same time, we also see more and more developments in the production of cultivated meat. For instance, nowadays, cultivated chicken is currently available in restaurants in Singapore, as well as in butchery. However, it will still be sometimes before we have fully cultivated meat products available in supermarkets. And in the meantime, there are opportunities to combine plant-based with cultivated meat components in order to respond faster to consumer demands for healthier, more sustainable, and more ethical food products. So today we will explore the business opportunity of hybrid foods, but also the challenges as well as consumer perceptions of the products. And I'm very happy to have a panel of experts to dive into the topic of hybrid foods. So we have Chris Bryant. He's a renowned consumer researcher specialized in alternative proteins, and he's also the director of Bryant Research, which is a company that offers a range of research-related services in the field of meat reduction and alternative proteins. We also have Katarina Polanowska. She is a senior research and development technologist at Innov. And Innov is a B2B ingredient company producing protein through fermenting fungi and using renewable feedstock. And we also have Oliver Naef. He's COO at Mirai Foods. And Mirai is a company focusing on the production of cultivated meat from beef cells. And they are based in Switzerland. And Oliver is today replacing his colleague Nicolo Razza, who unfortunately couldn't join the webinar today. And so quickly about the structure of the webinar. First, Chris will present some insights on consumer research on hybrid foods that we carried out together recently. And then we will move on to a discussion together with Katarina and Oliver. And please, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A box. So a little bit before we dive into the topic, I would like to introduce you to ProVeg. So ProVeg is an international food awareness organization working to transform the global food system by replacing conventional animal-based products with plant-based and cultivated food alternatives. We operate globally, and we currently have offices in 10 countries throughout Europe, the US, Africa, and Asia. Our mission is to reduce the global animal consumption by 50% by the year 2040. And our vision is a world where everyone chooses delicious and healthy food that is good for all humans, animals, and our planet. And we have 5 main action areas. We support startups and work with companies to help them in their plant-based and cultivated food strategy. We work to influence government and policy to ensure a favorable landscape for plant-based and cultivated products. We build cross-sector networks, and we run public awareness campaigns. So that's it from me. And now over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Mathilde, and thank you also for running the slides for me today. And my apologies in advance if my connection here is a little bit temperamental. I may disappear, but if I do, I shall be back within 10 seconds, so no panic. Yes, thank you. And we'll be going through, first of all, a survey which I ran with ProVeg last year on the Attest platform. And we were looking at consumer perceptions of a range of different hybrid products. Today, we're going to be focusing on plant-based cultivated meat products. So we reached out to a representative sample of 1,000 UK adults, and we have been looking at their views on a range of hybrid products, and we'll go into some of those today. Let's go to the next slide, Mathilde. Thank you. So first of all, this is the overall rate of acceptance. These are people who answered probably yes or definitely yes to questions as to whether they would eat and whether they would buy a plant-based cultivated hybrid burger. So we're talking about a specific product here in the form of a burger, and this is with plant-based and cultivated meat ingredients in a hybrid form. So we can see that overall 35% of our representative UK sample said that they would be willing to eat and willing to buy this form of hybrid meat. This is already quite promising. We've also got so about 1 in 3 essentially willing to buy and eat already. We've also got a fair portion who are uncertain, and some people who are also a bit more negative towards the concept at the moment. Just to give a bit of context for these numbers, we can see we also asked in the same survey about plant-based meat purely and cultivated meat purely. So we had 64% said that they were probably or definitely willing to eat plant-based meat, and 39% said they were probably or definitely willing to eat cultivated meat. So 64 for plant-based, 39 for cultivated. We're a little bit lower for the hybrid products at 35%. And it's likely that that is reflecting the lower degree of familiarity with these products so far. So consumers in the survey were given a brief paragraph explaining what each of these products is, but certainly hybrid products at this stage are going to be less familiar to consumers compared to plant-based and cultivated meat. And we've seen in previous research that familiarity really is quite a big driver of acceptance of these novel foods. So next slide, please. Thank you. We see a familiar picture here with respect to gender. We had 40% of men and 31% of women in the sample saying that they would eat plant-based cultivated meat hybrids. And this is similar to the picture that we see with respect to cultivated meat. Generally, men are a little more willing to eat new and unfamiliar foods, whereas women are more likely to be a bit cautious towards these products. So it's not a huge gender divide, but generally we're seeing about 9 percentage point higher willingness to eat amongst male consumers compared to females in the sample. Next slide, please. We also saw a higher willingness to try amongst younger respondents. So 51% and 47% of Gen Z and millennials said that they are willing to eat plant-based cultivated hybrid products. And that compares to 32% for Gen X and 29% for baby boomers. So again, this is somewhat familiar when we look at other food innovations. We generally see that we have a higher proportion of younger people who are more likely to be innovators with respect to food technology and also with respect to technology in general. Younger generations tend to be more willing to change and to adopt new products. They're often the innovators and the early adopters for these categories. We also saw an interesting trend with respect to education. So university educated young people were amongst the most open demographic. And when we look at the patterns of education overall, we actually saw that the more educated respondents tended to be slightly more polarized. So we did have a higher percentage of university educated respondents saying that they would eat these hybrid products, but we also had a higher percentage of them saying that they wouldn't eat these hybrid products, whereas the lower education segments were more likely to be undecided compared to the higher education segments. So a couple more points to highlight from the report. Next slide, please, Mathilde. Thank you. So one thing that we find useful to ask about in these kind of surveys is generally perceptions of a range of characteristics which are associated with acceptance. So what are consumers' perceptions of a product's tastiness, enjoyability, healthiness, and so on. So here we can see the percentage who agreed, disagreed, or neither agreed nor disagreed with a range of statements about hybrid products. And we can see a pretty positive picture on most of these traits. So we have a majority of respondents saying that they expect hybrid products to be good for animals, good for the environment, and also to be healthy, nutritious, and safe, which of course are very important prerequisites to consumer adoption. So it's very positive that we're seeing generally positive perceptions of those traits so far. A little bit lower scores for taste and enjoyability, which can suggest that taste is continuing to be a barrier for many foods, including the plant-based sector, and some of those perceptions seem to be carrying over to hybrid products as well. Of course, one of the potential benefits of these kind of hybrid products is that we're able to include the structure and the ingredients and some of the nutritional benefits of plant-based products with some of the taste brought in from the cultivated meat elements as well. And the most negatively perceived characteristics in this survey were affordability and ease of access. So I think that this is quite a positive picture overall. This really suggests that these are quite pragmatic barriers, and these are probably things which can be solved and overcome with further product development and innovations which bring down the cost and increase the accessibility of hybrid products and other forms of alternative proteins as well. So this is an overall picture of the kind of perceptions that consumers have of different characteristics of hybrid products. And the final slide we'll go to now, please, Mathilde. Thank you. This was a question about consumers' anticipated frequency of eating the different products that we asked about. And we can see that really these hybrid products are occupying an occasional eating experience for most consumers. So just 10% saying that they expected to eat these products every day, and more than 2/3 saying that they expected to eat them less often than once a week. So yeah, a majority of people basically anticipating less regular consumption of these hybrid products, but 10% anticipating to eat every day is certainly not nothing, and highlights that there really is a market for these kind of hybrid products alongside plant-based and cultivated meat products. So thank you for your attention, and I'll hand back to Mathilde for the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Chris. All right, so let's move on to the panel discussion. It's to you, Chris, but also to everyone. So if we look here at early consumer data on hybrid plant-based and cultivated products, so what do you think are the best predictors that shows that consumers will be open to hybrid products?
Yeah, so I think there are, of course, already some examples of successful hybrid products in cultivated and plant-based meat. The cultivated meat product in Singapore is in fact a hybrid product, which uses some plant-based ingredients. And so I think that the patterns that we see in other kinds of product categories are likely to apply here as well. So the most innovative consumers, the earliest adopters, are likely to be younger people, as we saw, more likely to be males with respect to food innovations specifically. And also higher levels of education can be a predictor of early adoption as well. So I think, as we've seen with other forms of alternative proteins, the early adopters are going to likely be young, well-educated, more so left-leaning politically and urban-dwelling people. So successful launch strategies for these products are probably going to focus on those kinds of markets where we're going to find those kinds of people.
Thank you very much.
And maybe just to add on, I think one indicator is also the pain that we hear from the plant-based industry or consumers who like to consume these types of products, that they are not entirely satisfied with some of the product characteristics. So of course, hybrid products still need to prove that they can solve some of these issues. But I think in the end, it will also, boil down to really offering a better experience. And once you can address that pain point, then I think it's you can even tackle the bigger challenge, which is not just, are consumers going to buy and try your product, but will they become repeating customers? Because that should be the end goal, right? Else it will be a pretty short-lived business model. But I think the pain point, and maybe Chris or Katarzyna can also comment on that. I think this is really the problem. Cultivated ingredients together with the plant-based players are trying to solve in a first step before long-term, including our goal at Mirai, is to really launch fully cultivated products.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very
much. Oliver, I fully agree. I think that once cultivated meat area can prove that it can help with the quality of plant-based product, and I think at the reasonable price, then we have a full success. And also, as you, Chris, mentioned in this report, there was said that education kind of help in understanding probably what's cultivated meat. That's why I think, for example, informing people, creating associations, as we, for example, took the initiative with other mycoprotein producers to create such association, fungi association, to promote and educate people so they are more familiar with the product. Because, for example, mycoprotein, I believe, can be a bit enigmatic name for such a product. The same for cultivated. So understanding that better can also help.
Thank you very much. So now a question to you, Oliver and Katarina. So we see more and more collaboration between plant-based and cultivated companies, and your companies are great examples. So Enough partnered with Piece of Meat, who are focusing on developing cultivated fats, and Mirai Food partnered with Rügenwalder Mühle to develop plant-based hybrid burger, so with Mirai's cultivated beef fat. So could you tell us more about this partnership? What do they entail, and what are the concrete planned and expected results?
Should I go first?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, exactly. So last year we announced a co-development partnership with Rügenwalder, which is of course very exciting. I mean, Rügenwalder has been one of the first movers, I think, at a bigger scale in the plant-based sector. And I remember watching their ads as a kid, you know, knowing their ad songs. So they have a very strong reputation, I think, amongst consumers, especially in the German-speaking room, where we also see Mirai still as the only fully or vertically integrated cultivated meat company. So that's why geographically we believe this is a very strong partnership as well. And it took time, honestly, to build this relationship. And I'm not sure if Katrina can comment on that as well, but building relationships with partners takes time. And there are a lot of iterations involved to figure out, okay, what should be the end goal and what is the product and what does it take to work towards that. With Rügenwalder, and you already mentioned it, so at Mirai, we are focusing on natural, non-genetically modified cultivated beef, which in our opinion is very important, especially if you try to address the European market. In terms of regulations, yes, but also I think a little bit the consumer sentiment. Europeans tend to be not as open as in the US, just because there are more contact points with GM foods in the US already, and consumers are more aware. And I think there we also see strong synergies with Rügenwalder to create a natural, high quality product, and a lot of similarities between the values and the brand that we are building in them. On the product specifics, I think it goes into the direction that I mentioned before. It's about improving taste and texture also a little bit, because it's a new combination between two new ingredients, right? And there is some kind of interplay between plant-based and cultivated ingredients that the industry is not so familiar with yet. The plant-based industry has their own processes, high moisture extrusion, blending the different ingredients until packaging. And you need to find ways where the cultivated ingredient can fit into that, still creating a food matrix that is as good or better, plus providing an improved taste and aroma and flavor. So we're really working with Rügenwalder on that, providing cultivated beef fat, and they kind of bring in their vast experience working with plant-based ingredients, but then also yeah, a lot of consumer insights and what is the best product to bring to market.
Thank you very much, Oliver. And Katharina, for Enough?
Yeah, well, that was very interesting what you said, Oliver. And that's true that we really need to understand what we are working with. And I believe that plant-based is slightly different than fungi-based, although we fall under the same umbrella. But we are producing our mycoprotein through fermentation. And when you look at this, we are not processing it very much. It has naturally fibrous textures. So implementing and incorporating cultivated biomasses like fat and meat, I think in this is much easier than in plant-based. So that's why it's so interesting. It's different type of hybrid, let's say. So for us, we are very open to collaboration. We've been talking with many companies over many years. So we are looking, I think that was more from the cultivated biomass companies side. They were looking mainly for the cost reduction, which is related to the production. So they were looking at mycoprotein as a scaffolding or as a hybrid. And our recent collaboration is with a piece of meat. They are producing chicken fat, chicken biomass. They are exploring different ingredients. And so for us, it was kind of obvious because we've been working on whole muscle cuts from avian. And also they want to produce it at scale, and we are also producing at the beginning 10,000 tons per year, with the plan to expand till up to 50,000 tons per year. So they were kind of obvious partner for us, and also because they are located quite closely. So we really like what they are doing, and I think there was a synergy, and it just worked. So within this collaboration, we were exchanging materials for testing. Then we are organizing tasting session to be able to compare these products, what's the functionality that the cultivated biomass brought to mycoprotein. There is still a lot to do because this is very initial step still phase. But yeah, there's a lot of knowledge within that collaboration and knowledge transfer. Yeah, so this is it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, or an interesting point you mentioned, Katarzyna. You know, the huge volumes you can produce with mycoprotein, 10,000 tons, 50,000 tons. I think from a process perspective on the cultivated meat side, no company in the world is currently producing these amounts. So the prototyping of products, what we realize also with these more established partners, you really have to think about, okay, what are we doing? What has to be done manually, you know? And usually large players, they want large quantities, so they can really test it in their manufacturing equipment and see, does it fit into our existing process? Because again, for them, it's cost optimization, process optimization, and so forth. So initially, you start more with a manual process, and you do kind of like fine tuning, like Katarzyna said. And then you step by step scale it into different process scales, so to say, before you really scale up.
Thank you very much, and yeah, thank you for sharing about your partnerships. It's very interesting. Still to you, Oliver and Katharina, what would be your recommendations for a plant-based company who wants to add cultivated fat or other ingredients in their plant-based products? And also at the same time, what are the main challenges in developing hybrid products?
So the recommendations, here I would say that at the beginning, the plant-based company has to ask the question what they are looking for, what's the functionality they are lacking in their product, and then to explore what the cultivated biomass can provide to them, because there are different approaches, different ways of production. And I think they need to test very bold ideas if they have any, and to think outside the box. And also, I think collaborate closely, as Oliver already mentioned before, to build the strong partnership, so they know what they are doing. And challenges in creating hybrid products. So probably, as everyone knows here, it's regulatory. I think Europe remains behind still, and Singapore, and it's so much easier, or United States, they're also more agile. Then the cost probably of prototyping and scaling up. Scalability itself, it's a problem, as Oliver mentioned. They are not yet able to produce at scale. And then we have to ask ourselves how we are going to communicate about hybrids, how we are going to tell the story, how we are going to convince the consumers to buy it. So what's the benefit of buying it, and what's the benefit of buying it at a higher cost, probably, as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can only underline what Katarzyna said as a first point. I think I just reach out. I think there are a few very curious players in the plant-based space and mycoprotein space, but I think they can just reach out, get to know what is cultivated meat actually about. We're also very happy to host people, you know, to show them what we're doing. and to create an understanding on both ends, because that will help you to accelerate the prototyping and product development of the hybrid product. And what we realized is, so we are very tech and science heavy, and also at more downstream, looking into food science. For plant-based players, depending a little bit, where they are, the food science and the really looking into what Katarina also mentioned, fibrous textures, what are the properties of these fibers, how do they react if you combine them either just with a fat biomass, but what happens if you want granules in your process? A lot of, for example, coconut fat is usually processed as granules, put through grinders. So to understand those expectations from our end as a cultivated meat player is also really important, because in the end, it's different if you just want to create a biomass versus granules versus a solid chunk of fat. And that just needs a lot of exchange, and maybe plant-based players or mycoprotein players can also then, adapt a little bit their science to find kind of an intermediate way to develop that product. And on the regulatory side, I think the hybrid approach as an intermediate step leading to a fully cultivated meat product has an advantage as it accelerates, I believe, the time until we see product on the market, because often it only requires one ingredient. So the partnerships we've read about mainly focus on fat, which means that you need to prepare one dossier for one ingredient or one tissue, which is fat. So if you have limited resources, I think you can focus more on one ingredient, and it also reduces the amount required in the end product. If you take, for example, a burger patty, 15 to 20% of fat, and you have a really good plant-based protein part, then from a manufacturing capacity, it requires a little bit less for a cultivated meat company. So you don't need to scale to the industrial facility where you need a lot of CapEx investment, but you can already commercialize a product with a really decent consumer reach at a smaller scale. And I think that will help to accelerate the industry as a whole, kind of as a stepping stone.
Thank you very much. And Katarina, you mentioned as a challenge regarding consumer acceptance, the communication around the products. And so to you all, what would be the best fitting terms for hybrid? Because right now we talk about the products using the term hybrid. Not sure it's very attractive from a consumer perspective. So do you have another term in mind? Because if we look at conventional companies who are producing hybrids but of plant-based and conventional meat, they use terms such as the blend, but they don't use the term hybrid. So what would be your recommendations on this aspect?
Well, I think terminology can be a bit challenging, and it would require some maybe like social study to explore what people would accept and understand, so we wouldn't confuse them, and it would be also according to the rules of the country where it's supposed to be sold. But as an example from our shelves, we usually buy a sausage as a sausage, and we are not thinking this is a hybrid, but in fact, it's a kind of a hybrid product because it usually contains, apart from meat, some other proteins like soy, etc. So it's maybe rather bringing a product with preferred name and teach people to understand it as it is. And by the time they will just get used to it. Yeah, hybrid itself, I think it's a bit like from the sci-fi movie, a name, so it's not very appealing. So maybe something like a fusion would be more appealing, especially in this in the food world where the fusion is already associated with something innovative, something tasty, like fusion cuisines, right?
Mm-hmm. And a quick note on the hybrid term. In our consumer survey, we use the term hybrid. So here it may have influenced negatively respondents because, yeah, as you said, hybrid can sound a bit, science fiction. So thank you.
I would agree with Katarzyna as well that we will probably see more recognizable brands, and you buy the product because you know the brand, and maybe those are, you know, entirely plant-based products, hybrid products, or fully cultivated meat products, but you don't necessarily look for those terms. You just try a product, you like it, you know the brand, and you will recognize the brand in the shelf. And I think we're already starting to see this. Katarzyna, you made one example about the sausage. I mean, Impossible Burger is another great example. There are other companies here in Switzerland we have planted. Then people don't necessarily talk about the product specifications, but they say, hey, let's make an Impossible Burger tonight, or let's cook planted. So I think we will see more in that direction. And of course, on the product packaging, there will be some kind of denomination, but that might be secondary once people just tasted the product and they like it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I broadly agree with what's been said. I think that the power of brand names is certainly something to keep in mind, and yeah, we could well see a situation where the brand names are more kind of commonplace than the generic category name, but nevertheless, you know, I think it's important to give some thought to the generic category name, not least because as Oliver mentioned, it's likely that regulators are going to require some kind of term, and Katerina is quite right in saying that identifiability and clarity for consumers is going to be a priority from the regulators' side. I think that you can do a lot worse than hybrid, to be honest. I don't think it's a bad term at all. One advantage of the term hybrid is that there's already a familiarity and almost an analogy to hybrid cars. So this is a concept that consumers are already somewhat familiar with hybrid cars, where it's not quite fully electric, but it has components of that and components of petrol. So I think it's useful to borrow that familiarity from hybrid cars when we talk about hybrid meats. There's also a number of other kind of positive sounding terms that could be used. So I've noted a few down here as Mathilde kindly shared the questions in advance. I've had a little bit of a think about this. Names like fusion, as Katerina mentioned, infused, united, synthesis. These are all terms which mean mixed together and have quite a positive connotation to them. But I think that we should be aware also of terms which can mean the same thing but have more of a negative connotation. In particular, the idea of compromising, I think, is one that we will want to be wary of. This product is not quite this and not quite that. People don't generally want to be compromising when it comes to their food choices. Also, the idea will be familiar to some consumers of fillers in meat products. So, for example, cheap sausages might have not 100% pork, but have some filler of other ingredients. I think that's something to be really aware of and wary of when it comes to talking about hybrid products. And any idea that could come up of kind of impurity or contamination or anything like that, I think these are some general ideas to keep in mind when we think about what terms could be used. But as I said, I think that hybrid is pretty good as it goes. I think there's also a number of other quite positive terms that have positive connotations and relate to things being mixed together. But yeah, there could certainly stand to be more research on that topic.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you.
And just one last point to add. I think even for fully cultivated meat products, right? It's yet to be seen at what percentage, you know, will you fall into the category of cultivated meat? Is that because many companies still work with other ingredients? Maybe they are just processing ingredients, or they end up in the end product as well. So I think that will influence as well the hybrid category, or however it is called. It could be that once you have a certain threshold in a hybrid product, that you would not be considered a hybrid anymore, but maybe that's what is, you know, going to be the cultivated meat category. So I think, but a lot of good points mentioned also by Chris that I agree with, that there needs to be a category, and that we also need to choose it carefully.
Thank you very much. Another question to you all. So in the supermarket of the future, how do cultivated, hybrid, and also plant-based products would compete? Or do you see them as complementary?
Well, maybe I will start. I think I see them as complementary because they are going to get to the market at a different price and with different quality probably. So I think they are going to target different consumers. So there are going to be consumers wanting to buy cultivated products like 100% because they could afford, and they are looking for the quality of these products, something special, something more probably. Then we have hybrid, which is much cheaper probably than cultivated, with potentially improved quality, but it still contains like the meat ingredient, which might be not suitable for consumers who are looking for purely plant-based because they are not eating meat at all, and it doesn't really matter if it's from animal. Well, both are from animal, but sourced differently. So I think they are complementary.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, generally. Oh, Chris, go ahead, please.
No, please go ahead, Oliver.
No, I would agree with Katarzyna as well. They're complementary. I do think, you know, there will be some competition when it comes to shelf space, which I think is already happening. I mean, now in most stores you have two shelves, one for real meat, one for alternatives. Both are very crowded and becoming ever more crowded. So a third alternative, I think, can be even more overwhelming for consumers. I do think there is space in terms of what consumers demand and need, but usually it takes a consumer, I think, Chris, you know that probably better than me, but a few seconds to make their choice. And so I think when we really present the products, there could probably be a better alternative than just having a third shelf.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yeah, again, I largely agree with what's been said. I think that primarily these products are going to be, well, I mean, on some level they will be competing with each other, of course. But primarily, I think that they will be complementary. And I think that there's consumer data already that has asked about both cultivated meat and plant-based in the same survey. And one thing that we observe from those kind of studies is that there's not a complete overlap of the people who say that they would eat each of those. So I'm trying to pull the numbers off the top of my head here. I'm not looking at them, but I think there was around about 40% of consumers in a representative survey in Belgium who said that they either would eat plant-based but wouldn't eat cultivated, or would eat cultivated but wouldn't eat plant-based. So there's a significant chunk of people who are finding one of these options appealing but not necessarily the other. And I think that there are different consumer demographics and sets of concerns that go along with each of those. So I think that certainly there is room for a variety of alternative proteins, including hybrid products, to appeal to different types of consumers, different consumer needs. And I think that we'll see that with hybrid products also.
Thank you very much. I see that, we have a few minutes left before the end of the webinar. So I'll move on to the Q&A, the questions from the audience. The first one is, in your opinion, where in supermarkets should hybrid products be placed? Rather next to conventional meat or rather next to plant-based meat alternatives?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we've seen this conversation already with plant-based products. Should they be placed on their own apart from the meat products, or should they be placed alongside the meat products? There is some evidence that people who would have been buying meat otherwise are more likely to see and purchase these products if they are next to their meat analogs. And I think that certainly applies for hybrid products, particularly if we're talking about hybrid products which do contain some conventional meat. Presumably those products are not going to be appealing to the vegetarian and vegan consumers who are looking towards the purely plant-based products. That said, I think that there is also a third solution to this, which is why not both, right? We can stock these products, and this goes for plant-based products as well, both in their own section where plant-based consumers are able to find them on their own, and also alongside their meat counterparts. And we've done some research under another project that I've been working on with ProVeg, showing that when these products appear twice, both in the plant-based section and next to the meat section, that's where you get the higher selection of those products. So I think, if at all possible, both.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, I agree. Well, I think, well, so that depends probably on the, the knowledge that we already have where it reaches the consumers best, quickest. But also what I think is important for consumers, so they are not going to make a mistake. So they are going to understand what they are buying, because I believe it's happening in the market that we go there, we want to buy either plant-based or meat-based, and we can make a mistake because the labeling is so similar. So as long as we can just, easily distinguish these products, I think it doesn't really matter where it is.
Thank you. And we have another question. And how can we prevent confusion with other hybrid products such as conventional meats and plant-based, which can also be referred as a hybrid? So here's the question: is what is the best way to educate and persuade consumers? I think we touched on a bit on this question so before, but if you have any additional comments.
Well, education. So probably as we look at the report, we saw that the young generation is the most interested and willing, open to buy and try and eat hybrid products, or probably any novel food. So we have to find means that can reach them. So probably some social media, but providing reliable information. And the language that we are using is important. It has to be quite easy, transparent. So I think this is the way that we are also communicating. Because if we are too sciencey, then we can be too boring, probably, to them. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question about preventing confusion with other types of hybrid products. I think that's certainly something that we should be aware of, and I think there's actually a point here that can apply to the broader conversation about labeling of alternative proteins as well. So there have been, various attempts, as people on the call will know, to restrict the labeling of alternative proteins to prevent plant-based and cultivated products from being able to use meat-like terms, for example. I think that one thing the alternative proteins industries can do to kind of combat this, but in a constructive way, which appeals to regulators and increases consumer clarity, is to say that animal products should be doing this as well. So there can be a system of labeling which makes it very clear to consumers when a product is cultivated or when a product is plant-based, and also when a product is made from animals. So, for example, a universal system which does all three of those, which can indicate, yes, this is plant-based, yes, this is made from animals, for example, if you're talking about conventional and plant-based hybrid meats that you get already, 2 of 3 of those indicators on packaging could be showing up. And I think that has a couple of advantages from the alternative proteins perspective. One is to position alternative proteins really alongside conventional meat as one of these 3 options that you might choose, and so as to position it as kind of, here are the 3 options, I think is going to increase selection of alternative proteins. And the other thing is to highlight something which is often easy to forget for consumers, and that's that animal products have come from animals. It sounds kind of strange to say it and very obvious when I word it like that, but most people and most meat eaters are not really making that association much of the time. So when they're buying their beef or chicken in the shop, they're not thinking this has come from a chicken or a cow who was walking around before. And so I think a labeling system which applies to cultivated, applies to plant-based, and applies to animal products will also, as well as positioning those 3 alongside each other as the 3 options, will serve to highlight the animal origins of conventional animal products as well.
And just quickly, I think you made a really good point, Chris. There is already, I think, some kind of confusion happening in the meat for meat products, especially processed meat products. I mean, if you look at many, cold cut sausages and in retail, they do contain a lot of times flours, pea flour or binders, and it's not a single-digit percentage. You see 20% or more just to create cheaper products, and but they are in the meat shelf. Consumers will never know about it except you really, like to read the labels. So I like your idea. Okay, if we create a transparent system, for all those categories that exist or are being built, then I think it should be a fair system, because for a very long time, I think the conventional meat products, they have enjoyed just a lot of freedom, and of course now there's a new emerging category that is has to fit in.
Yeah, totally. And I think, you're absolutely right about the meat products. In a sense, we already have hybrid products of meat and plant-based. And yes, that's often done to make products cheaper. And another thing that we can think about here is making those products more nutritious as well. By replacing some of the pork content with some kind of plant-based content, we can reduce the levels of saturated fat, we can reduce the levels of cholesterol, we can increase the levels of fiber. So I think it's also about highlighting the benefits of doing that, and moving beyond, which I think is the common reason this is done with existing products in that category. Just doing it to make them cheaper. We can kind of talk about some of the health benefits of doing that also.
Thank you very much. We are now at the end of the webinar. Do you have, so maybe one last question before we end this webinar. So what do you think the future holds for hybrid products? Just a few words.
Well, from my point of view, the future holds for sure less consumption of meats, and there will be more consumption of fermented proteins. And within that, also cultivated biomass, I believe, but that strongly depends where we can get with the cost of the production. Because we need to feed a really large amount of people of these proteins. So, but I believe it is going to provide some functionality to plant-based, to fungi-based that we cannot find with present ingredients. So yeah, definitely it's going to develop.
Thank you very much, Katharina. Oliver?
I agree. I think even the present is already bright. The future will be even brighter, and I hope that within the next 2 years we will see the first hybrid products on the European market.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think that you know, plant-based will definitely be a part of future cultivated meat products, as it already has been. That will continue to be the case. There could also be more conventional plant-based hybrids coming. We've seen ranges like raised and rooted and the blend, which Mathilde had highlighted in the call notes here. There are also other ranges that I can think of in the UK. Tesco has meat and veg range, which is a conventional plant-based hybrid. So I think we're probably going to see more things like that. And I think that those products, while of course they still contain conventional animal products, they may have a role to play in terms of being a sort of stepping stone for people who are a bit more stubborn about adopting alternative proteins or feel some need to fulfill the kind of social expectation of still eating meat. But I think that eventually, along with animal products, those kind of hybrids which contain animal products are going to fade out, and so they can be seen as kind of a transitionary product. But yeah, I think in terms of plant-based cultivated meat hybrids, I think we'll certainly see more of those to come, and yeah, optimistic about that market for sure.
Thank you very much. Well, on this great words, I want to thank you all for your participation on the webinar, and the recordings will be available in the next few days on our website. So thank you very much again, and have a great day.
Thank you, Mathilde. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.